After recording videos singing the praises of Daniel Salazar's capsule episode, I was left disturbed and irritated by Season 4 of Fear the Walking Dead. My irritation came not only because the flaws were obvious, but AMC appeared to be consciously injecting the problems of The Walking Dead into Fear the Walking Dead. So after comparing Season 3 to the flaws of The Walking Dead Season 7, I then had to consider my continued fandom for both shows. I didn't see that coming at all. From a writing perspective, a season-to-season break can be compared to things like act breaks, but just because a season is a comparatively huge block of narrative time doesn't mean we can take huge liberties with narrative. In fact, it should be considered the opposite. Fans had spent a huge amount of time investing in Season 3 of Fear the Walking Dead after Seasons 1 and 2 were heavily criticised. I believe AMC's decisions for Season 4 are in those terms pretty disrespectful to fans. So how did AMC ruin this show? Here's my opening statement. This is not Memento. I'm not trying to be facile, but with a one-shot piece of narrative such as this early, relatively low-budget movie from Christopher Nolan, you can be experimental. There are natural limits to what you can do with a narrative that fans have invested dozens of hours in. We don't need experimental time slicing here. One name in the domain of creative writing then, Aristotle. He talked about what are called the classical unities, time, place and action. No creative writing teacher, as far as I know, insists that stories be told in the same place and time throughout, yet the reasons that Seasons 3 and 4 are like night and day are down to these simple issues. I'm going to blast through why Season 3 was so strong in those terms. The season opens, bam, with our intro into what will be one of the best extended heel-face turns I've seen on TV in a long time, that for Troy. The setup is there immediately for a really rich interplay between Troy and Madison, which will see Shakespearean levels of intrigue develop at the ranch compound. Literally, at one point I was reading the lines from Alicia and Madison to the two brothers, as Lady Macbeth-style references, possibly a little too obvious. Although we're not at the ranch yet, geography, or as Aristotle would say, place, is used well in episode 1 and established within the same time and same action, with some real tension before we move to the ranch in episode 2. This is a good use of geography to identify things like act breaks, but not in Fear Season 4 where it's all over the place. Before we even make it to the ranch, we have Travis dead and the rapport between Alicia and Jake set up. The writers have an extended face-heel turn from patriarch Jeremiah Otto set up early. Later, in a fast-paced series of plot developments, we have the very rich seeds of yet more heel-face and face-heel turns, which work because they make sense in this narrative world. We already have Strand, Daniel, Madison, Troy, and Jeremiah's trajectory set up by the end of Episode 3. Episode 5 is where we are led, cleverly, into falsely predicting a malicious antagonism, but that's the point. Season 3 used many character pieces, but on a more limited board directed toward the ranch, and allowed them to interact and move forwards in time towards a strong destination. Even the geography implied by Daniel and Strand was necessary, and a hint towards where the central family would, literally, move towards. For weeks after that season, I was left wondering on how they fit so much action into a relatively compact set of locations, and mainly around a community at the ranch. Season 4, after the promise of Season 3, completely ditches our leads for the first episode. I'd read fan talk preceding Season 4 on how they wanted the writers to approach any jump forward in time, possibly not explaining the events following the dam explosion. But they didn't just excise all of those follow-up scenes, they removed them from audience awareness, jumped forward, then all over the place, often with a character from a completely different show, Morgan. Even now, this choice by AMC feels bizarre. We can talk about metatext or paratext or fan feeling and fan comment across shows, but let this writer decision sink in and feel free to leave your opinion in the comments. Fans were desperately wanting to follow up the promise of Season 3 with some form of narrative on the aftermath of the Season 3 finale. Instead, what AMC and their writers did is have a season opener with completely new characters for 4 minutes, then brief credit sequence that appears to say this is indeed Fear the Walking Dead, but in fact they then show The Walking Dead. You have credits rolling under what is actually The Walking Dead TV show. In fact, it could be said that everything up to 16 minutes is The Walking Dead. You then have to make an arbitrary decision as viewer and fan to say that when the footage of his feet goes dark, he's walked into Fear the Walking Dead, which is very strange indeed. Anyway, the writers link Morgan's journey to our Fear family via a random encounter in which Morgan, Althea and John Dory are tricked. Episode 2 starts with this, before, and you are Aristotle in his grave, groan inside. The problems of unity and ripping the viewer out of the story begin with starting the season as The Walking Dead and continue here, where or when, in fact, these scenes could be any length of time from the dam. Finding and building this new community could have taken 1, 2 or 3 years or even more from the dam explosion. If they really needed Morgan in Fear, which I question anyway, then he could have been a shock appearance after the season's opening. But of course AMC had already given away the secret. We have Nick but no Daniel. The season 3 finale indicated Nick and Daniel were separated together from the rest of the group. So after doing all that character development with Daniel, they now don't even mention him. And you can look at my other lecture on Daniel Salazar's capsule episode to see how great I think that episode was. And of course they already wasted the character development with Troy by killing him off at the end of season 3. The mere presence of those two alpha males in a scene with the pseudo-saviors, the vultures, would have imbued the story with added tension. And we come to Naomi, who in the before, we can at least see what the writers were trying to do. So it's, Morgan's walking from Walking Dead to Fear the Walking Dead with a cowboy in love. Morgan wants to be alone but finally befriends the cowboy. Naomi wants to be alone but finally befriends Madison Al. Only Naomi and the young girl Charlie, there with the vultures. Twist! And now Cowboy turns up with Morgan and new twist. Naomi is the true love he was looking for all along. Conflict. The problem is those were fairly cheap twists, as was the before and after technique. These were not the same gradual face heel or heel face turns of season 3. So, recap, episode 1. No Fear characters, no update. Episode 2. The seeds of a major conflict between the vultures and our family. Right at the end of this before, we get now. Episode 1 was fairly charming, but not Fear the Walking Dead, and definitely not a continuation of season 3. By the end of episode 2, I am really irritated. Now into episode 3, and the flicking back and forth, Nick before and Nick now, is grating, but there's an option missed with Althea. If I had to go that route, then I would have gone full Althea, which I'll return to shortly. Looking at the 2 seasons again, they appeared to be mirroring each other. Season 3 sees the battle for the ranch reach a mid-season finale crescendo with an apparent switch of allegiances. Madison's solution on the conflict to give Walker Otto's head as the necessary sacrifice. Season 4 similarly builds to a mid-season finale in which Madison is in fact the sacrifice for the baseball diamond, but I remember each half and know which one I preferred. As the cover song for Stand By Me played in the season 3 mid-season finale, and I considered all of the character arcs that got us from episode 1 to there, I had some lovely narrative chills. And the collapse of this community from the midpoint in season 3 was well executed, whereas the writer's flashback conceit for season 4 sucked all narrative thrust out of the viewing experience. We knew not to worry about particular characters in the before, as they were fine in the now. Of course, in one way this did add to the shock of Nick's death, but it was in the wrong place. On the possibility of going full Althea, as we can see here with Luciana's witness testimony, my suggestion is that there are many more intelligent ideas you could find in the what's your story angle than those used. Rather than start the entire show as The Walking Dead, this Morgan backstory could have been explained when Althea meets Morgan later. And as Althea has the Madison connection, they, with John Dory, could have been introduced to our family and the Vultures. Having said that, I think it would have been much better, a la Aristotle, to have been told straight. With the Fear v Walking Dead time difference, it would still be easy to have Morgan come in at some point in the Vulture's plot, and in so doing we could have avoided it being Morgan and friends. It's not only disrespectful to the actors playing the mainstay Fear characters, but also to the fans who've invested their time in those characters. Keep the Storm, fine, but have some form of sacrifice in the baseball diamond, say Nick, as the actor wanted to leave anyway, and have a hunting chase in second half, leading to other geography, and a hurricane if necessary. You can't blame fans for calling this show Morgan and Friends. The season opened with Morgan, and so too does the second half. And Morgan and Althea are actually discussing the Walking Dead universe like fanboy and fangirl. And this second half involves Morgan's stated desire to return to the Walking Dead narrative world. So a character from an entirely different show is featured strongly this season, with arguably two of the strongest mainstays killed off, and another, Daniel, missing in action with not even a mention. It's truly bizarre. The character they clumsily injected into this show wants to take Althea and then multiple other new characters back to Virginia and Alexandria. Bizarre again. And meanwhile, in the show that used to be Fear the Walking Dead, Morgan goes looking for John Dory and yet more characters who were not in season 3. And Morgan tries to steal these new characters for The Walking Dead, but within a scene of Fear the Walking Dead. Talk about metatextuality. They could have taken it into full metafiction terrain here and had John Dory explain that after Hand of God with Ron Perlman, he's just happy to have found himself a regular spot in a decent TV show. He's now comfortable here and doesn't want to risk being a small fish in an even bigger, failing pool. Then fans could boo Morgan through the window there, telling him to leave without taking any more characters. And I really like Morgan, that's the point. That's the sad point about it, but just not in Fear the Walking Dead and how it was treated. And yes, this opening episode of the second half appears to mirror the visits Morgan received in episode 1, but that just adds to the idea that this is now the Morgan and Friends show. We then have a filler episode with some decent character work, I guess, featuring Alicia, but we're back again to the Morgan show next, in which the writers force all of the multiple characters at some point to talk about and be wistful for Alexandria and the Walking Dead world. Perhaps the idea is to remind us just how bad that show got before Morgan left, in order to increase Fear's capital in comparison. Instead, AMC injected all of the plot-wandering flaws of The Walking Dead in its later seasons into Fear. Yes, I think this is likely irreparable damage. Sadly, R.I.P. Fear the Walking Dead.